I can't even remember how many times I've had to call security over the past few years. It felt like every other day, some passenger would lose their mind, getting verbally abusive or even violent. The worst part? Most of these blow-ups were over the most ridiculous, unbelievable little things. Someone got impatient and tried to cut the line to board, then started screaming and cursing at me and my colleagues. Someone got looked at the wrong way by another passenger and flew into a hysterical rage. A baby cried on the plane, and an adult started wailing louder than the infant. I even saw two passengers start throwing punches because one of them missed out on the last chocolate donut with rainbow sprinkles. You heard me right. I've seen it all with my own eyes. I was so done. Every morning, I'd wake up wondering what kind of psycho I'd have to deal with that day. The stress was grinding me down to nothing. So, I started looking for a new job. But after a few weeks, I was getting discouraged. All my experience and skills were in the airline industry, so the only jobs that really fit were at other airlines. And honestly, if I was just going to move to a different airport to deal with the same chaos, what was the point of even moving? Then one night, at 1:30 in the morning, I finally finished a long evening shift. I was propped up by a lukewarm, terrible cup of coffee, still scrolling through job postings online. That's when I saw the ad for Pine Woods Airport, a small airport in a remote part of the Midwest. Curious, I clicked on the page and took a sip of the bitter coffee. The photos showed a tiny place, a couple of runways, a single terminal, and an interior with a warm, quiet, forest lodge feel. It was perfect for me. That's what I thought at the time. Fewer people and a quiet environment meant I wouldn't have to spend my days walking on eggshells around ticking time bombs. I kept reading. The job description was almost identical to my current one, with the only difference being that this position required frequent night shifts. But that was no problem for me at all. I was already used to working nights. What were a few all-nighters in exchange for a peaceful environment? What shocked me even more was the salary. It was significantly higher than what I was making after more than 3 years at my current airport. I couldn't believe my eyes. My exhaustion vanished. I immediately uploaded my resume, filled out all the application questions, and even spent a full hour on a cover letter I probably didn't even need. That night, I fell asleep full of hope for the future, dreaming of leaving behind those overcrowded terminals and agitated passengers. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I habitually checked my phone for notifications and emails, and I froze. I had already gotten a reply about the new job, just a few hours after I'd submitted my application. The email was from the hiring manager at Pine Woods Airport, the same manager who posted the ad. His name was John. He invited me for an interview. I replied almost instantly, and we quickly scheduled it for my lunch break that same afternoon. The morning shift flew by. I boarded passengers, sent off flights, but my mind was completely on the upcoming interview. When the time finally came, my palms were sweating with nerves. But that tension disappeared within the first minute of the interview. The man on the other side of the screen, bald, clean-shaven, in a sharp suit, gave me a warm smile. He introduced himself as John. His friendly demeanor immediately put me at ease. We talked about my work experience, and he briefly went over the job duties, basically the same as what I was doing, just with more night shifts, but for a shockingly high salary. For me, that wasn't an issue. Just when I thought the interview was about to end, John flashed that signature smile of his and asked a completely unexpected question. "So, when can you start?" I had just taken a sip of coffee and almost spit it right back into the cup. I looked up at the screen, stammering, trying to find the right words. Aren't you going to call me later? Aren't you going to interview other people? And what about the onboarding process and all the paperwork?" John just waved his hand, his smile never fading, his tone so casual it was almost impossible to refuse. "You're our only applicant, and our ideal candidate. As for the paperwork, we can handle all that later. Just tell me, when can you be here? The sooner, the better, he added. Although a part of me was still in disbelief and confused, a powerful sense of excitement quickly took over. During the rest of the call, we arranged a specific start date. After hanging up, I sank back into a chair in the break room and couldn't help but let out a low laugh. It all felt a bit unreal. Of course, I knew that under normal circumstances, you're supposed to give at least 2 weeks' notice before leaving a job, and that moving states requires detailed planning and preparation. But honestly, in that moment, I didn't care about any of that. I was just that desperate to leave my job. Fueled by a sense of urgency, and maybe a bit of impulsiveness and recklessness, John and I set my start date for just a little over a week later. At the end of my shift that day, I told my manager I was leaving in a week. She was clearly not happy about it, but she nodded and said it was fine. My final shift was the ultimate test of my sanity. A couple stormed up to the counter, screaming for no reason, demanding I give them a full refund while also insisting they still be allowed to board the plane. When I calmly explained that I couldn't refund their tickets and still let them fly for free, the man started yelling, and the woman quickly joined in with a chorus of threats. Almost instinctively, I hit the security button. A few guards rushed over, and I glanced down at my watch. My last shift was officially over. I let out a long sigh of relief and walked away from that place without a second glance, a place I never wanted to set foot in again. Even though I was running on several nights of poor sleep and facing a long, potentially stressful move, I had never felt so light and exhilarated. To my surprise, the drive was incredibly smooth. I even arrived a few hours earlier than expected and checked into a small motel I'd booked for the transition period. After dumping a few boxes of my things and a suitcase full of clothes into the room, I turned off the lights and was fast asleep almost the second my head hit the pillow. When I opened my eyes again, it was completely dark outside. Revitalized by the night, I got up and started getting ready for my first night shift. I quickly got dressed and headed out, planning to arrive well ahead of time. I was naive. I completely underestimated how much trouble I'd have navigating these unfamiliar roads. After countless wrong turns, I finally arrived at the small airport. It looked even more miniature than in the photos. At that point, I only had a few minutes until my shift started. I rushed through the entrance and was met by a team of security guards. When they saw me, they didn't even ask any questions. As soon as I mentioned I was there for work and that John was waiting for me, they immediately waved me through. In that moment, the airport seemed to have an unusually gentle atmosphere. The attitude of the guards, the quietness of the building itself, the scenery of the surrounding forest, it all gave me a strange sense of peace. I walked through the empty terminal, and at the far end, a familiar figure was sitting behind the counter. It was John. He was looking down, working on something, and only looked up as I approached. The moment our eyes met, his slightly weary face seemed to light up. I was about to apologize for being late, but before I could get a word out, he was already walking quickly toward me, leading me down a hallway to the employee locker room. He had already prepared a uniform and an ID badge for me, and even cleared out a locker with my name on it. "Get changed quickly, then meet me at the counter," he said, then hurried off. I did as he said. A few minutes later, I walked out of the locker room in my new uniform and saw John back at the counter, gathering his personal belongings while checking something on the screen. The whole process was too smooth, so smooth it felt unreal. He noticed me approaching, looked up, and thanked me with a smile, saying how grateful he was that I could start so soon. He handed me a steaming cup of coffee, his tone light and casual. "I have to get going, though. I've been on duty for 17 hours straight." He rubbed his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, but his demeanor was still relaxed. "You should already be familiar with our systems and software, so the procedures won't be a problem for you." With that, he patted my back and, in a tone you'd use with an old friend, reassured me, "It's going to be a quiet night. No flight scheduled. Just take it easy and relax." Just as he was turning to leave, he spun back around as if he'd suddenly remembered something, smiled, and added, "Oh, right. I almost forgot the most important thing." He pulled a laminated piece of paper from his bag and handed it to me. "Take a look at this when you get a chance. Read it a few times if you need to. Whatever you do, don't deviate from what it says." I had just taken the paper, not yet having a chance to read it, when a scene out of the corner of my eye made my heart tighten. John was walking toward the exit, and the security guards were leaving one by one. Even the cashier at the only shop was turning off the lights and pulling down the security gate. I instinctively looked around and finally realized, all the scanners and metal detectors at the security checkpoint were turned off. A sense of unease began to spread rapidly within me. "Hey, John. Where is everyone going?" It was the first time I had spoken to my new boss since entering the airport. He stopped and turned back, his tone still casual. "Oh, right, I forgot to mention. During the night shift, everyone leaves the airport temporarily, except for you at this post." My mind went blank. "Don't worry, security will be back around 5 a.m., he said with a smile. "This whole airport is yours. If you get bored, you can browse a magazine in the little shop, maybe grab a snack." He turned and started walking toward the exit again, then glanced back at me one last time, his tone slightly more serious than before. "But before you do anything, you have to read that paper. You're going to need it." I just stood there, stunned, watching as John left with the entire night shift crew. The entire airport was suddenly so quiet that the only sound was the gentle hum of the HVAC system. I tried to calm myself down, tried to process the fact that I was going to be spending a 10-hour night shift completely alone in an empty airport. No one to bother me, no one shouting, no one losing their mind, no one demanding to rebook a flight at the last second. And I was making the highest hourly wage of my life. The thought was a little exciting, but my eyes were inevitably drawn back to that piece of paper. "Don't deviate from it." John's warning echoed in my ears. I finally sat down in a chair behind the counter, took a sip of coffee, and clutched the laminated paper tightly in my hand. I looked down at the neatly arranged text. A total of 6 rules, laid out meticulously. Rule 1. All lights inside the airport must remain on at all times. If you notice a light has gone out, or if you accidentally turn one off, turn it back on immediately. If a light fixture appears to be broken or cannot be turned back on, calmly leave the area and report it to John or the maintenance department when possible. Do not listen to the voices. Do not listen to the voices. Rule 2. In the event of rain or a thunderstorm, ignore rules 3, 4, and 5. These rules do not apply during inclement weather. Remain indoors. Do not use the men's restroom. Avoid the area near the men's restroom as much as possible. Rule 3. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., a young woman will exit the women's restroom and enter the waiting area. Her name is Alice. She will sit down, occasionally move to a different seat, and sometimes pace around the hall. She will try to talk to you. You must not respond. You may look at her, nod, or even communicate through writing or a handshake, but you must never speak. If you speak to her, go to the men's restroom immediately. Stay inside until she has left. Rule 4. Sometime between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., a janitor in a blue uniform will appear at the main entrance. He will knock and tell you his name. If he says his name is Henry, let him in. If he gives any name other than Henry, immediately close and lock the door. Do not say another word and walk away from the entrance. If the man is indeed Henry, he will perform his cleaning duties quietly. If he asks to clean the area you are in, please cooperate. He is not hostile and will not disturb your work. You may speak with Henry. He will leave on his own when it is time. Rule 5. Around 3 a.m., a small red and black airplane may appear on the runway. You will not see it land, nor will you see it take off. It will simply appear in your field of vision when you aren't looking. Once you see it, do not look at it again. Do not even look in its direction. There is a photograph of this airplane posted behind the terminal counter for identification. Rule 6. As dawn approaches, a group of men claiming to be from the TSA may enter the airport. They have their own set of keys and will let themselves in. Some of them may be armed and often appear agitated and nervous. They will search the entire airport building, room by room, and ask you some questions. You may cooperate with their investigation. They have full authority within the building. However, under no circumstances are they allowed to enter the jet bridge area. They will not force their way in. They will only attempt to enter if you give them verbal permission. And you must never give that permission. I read the laminated sheet several times before slowly placing it on the desk. I leaned back in my chair and took a big gulp of coffee. My mind was a total blank. What was this? New employee orientation, or a campfire ghost story? John. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would joke around, especially not about work. And this paper, it was written too seriously, too specifically, and with too much authority to be a prank. Was it some kind of tradition? A practical joke? Or was there really something unspeakable about this airport? I started to question my decision. The entire hiring process had been too rushed, too hurried, too smooth. John hadn't even left any detailed explanations before handing the entire airport over to me for the night. I almost laughed out loud. But I couldn't. This wasn't some internet story, not some twisted immersive horror experience. I had looked up this airport. It was real, with flights and operations, and John himself wasn't a fictional character. I completely dismissed the possibility of it being a prank. Nobody would go to this much trouble to scare someone, especially not at their own place of employment. But even so, I couldn't help but glance at the paper on the desk again. If you see the red and black plane, do not look at it a second time. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I decided to play along, just to see what would happen. Maybe it was a test for the new hire, to see if I could follow instructions. Glancing at the list again, I noticed that if it were raining, I wouldn't have to worry about many of the rules. So I pulled out my phone to check the weather. Clear skies. No rain all night. Great, I thought. So tonight I have to watch out for Alice, Henry, and a plane that might just pop up out of nowhere. I picked up my coffee, stood, and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, sipping my drink while admiring the brightly lit runway. It was truly beautiful in that moment, peaceful, like time had stopped. Just as I raised my cup to take the last sip, I heard the crisp click of high heels on the tile floor behind me. Startled, I spun around, and the coffee cup slipped from my hand, spilling all over the floor. At the far end of the rows of waiting chairs stood a young woman. She was in her 20s, holding a large, vintage leather suitcase in each hand, and wearing a dress and heels that seemed out of place. Her makeup was perfect, her demeanor elegant, and her features were so beautiful they were almost unreal. The most surprising thing was, she gave me a friendly smile. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to scare you." Her tone was sincere as she walked gracefully toward me. I almost said, "It's okay," but the words died on my lips. I remembered the laminated paper, Rule 3. She's Alice. She must be an actor hired by John? Here to test me on purpose? Whatever the case, I couldn't respond. I straightened my back, smoothed the wrinkles on my uniform, and offered a polite smile in return. She came closer, set down her luggage, and extended a hand. "Looks like it's just the two of us in this whole airport tonight. My name is Alice." I shook her hand and nodded. A flicker of disappointment seemed to cross her eyes. "You don't seem very talkative." She smiled, withdrew her hand, and turned to walk toward the waiting area. I went back to the counter and sat down, watching her quietly. She stopped in front of the unattended shop, carefully examining the magazine covers, occasionally glancing my way. A few minutes later, she came back with a small stack of magazines. She walked up to me and placed a copy of National Geographic on the counter. "I have a feeling you'll like this one." She winked. "Enjoy." Then she sat down in the front row of seats, directly facing me, and began to quietly flip through her own magazine. To be honest, her intuition was spot on. Even though I'd always lived in the city, I had a strange fascination with the natural world. National Geographic was one of my favorite magazines, and I often read it during my breaks, but I rarely had the uninterrupted, leisurely time to read it like I did tonight. I almost opened my mouth to say thank you, but I held back. A rule is a rule. The next few hours passed without incident. We read our respective magazines, looking up occasionally to exchange a glance or a smile. She tried to get me to talk about 6 or 7 times during that period. I almost asked her to get me another magazine. Thankfully, I managed to stop myself. It wasn't until around 1:30 a.m. that a few soft knocks echoed from the front door. Alice and I looked up at almost the same time. She giggled. "Oh, that must be the lovely janitor." With that, she went back to her magazine. I walked to the airport's front door, and sure enough, a man in his 30s wearing a blue uniform was standing outside, waiting quietly. I had just unlocked the door and was about to open it when he started to step inside, but I suddenly remembered the most important detail from Rule 4. I immediately pulled the door mostly shut, my voice firm. "Wait a second." He froze, looking up at me with a confused yet friendly smile on his face. "What's your name?" I asked. He stared at me for a few seconds, and then his smile widened. "Henry. I'm the janitor. Didn't John tell you I was coming tonight?" I paused, my mind quickly running through each letter. He said Henry. That was correct. I nodded, opened the door again, and let him in. As soon as Henry entered, he walked straight to the janitor's closet near the men's restroom. I watched him suspiciously for a few minutes as he got to work, mopping the floor, checking supplies. His movements were completely natural. He didn't seem like an actor or someone in disguise. I gradually relaxed and sat back down at the counter to continue reading my magazine. The next half hour was surprisingly calm. Henry moved busily through the different areas. Alice would occasionally get up to stand and admire the paintings and old photographs on the walls. But this peace was soon shattered. Henry approached the counter, pushing his mop, his gaze fixed on the 2 old leather suitcases sitting beside it. I thought he wanted to clean that spot, so I stood up, intending to help him move them. I grabbed the handle of one suitcase, and then the other, but they wouldn't budge. I paused, squatting down to check. They weren't stuck or tied to anything, they were just immovable. I tried the other one, but it was the same. I even grabbed one with both hands, planting my feet and using all my strength to lift. It still didn't move. I looked back at Henry, who just gave a slight nod toward Alice. I followed his gaze. Alice was standing up with a smile. "Let me get that." She casually lifted both suitcases, as if they were 2 bags of flour, moved them over to her seat, and then dropped them with a loud thud. The sound was immense, a heavy, dull thud, like a block of iron hitting the floor, echoing through the empty airport. I instinctively flinched back, looking at her, then back at Henry. He, however, was completely unfazed, continuing to mop as if nothing had happened. I slowly walked back to the counter, my eyes never leaving Alice. A few minutes later, she noticed my stare and returned a mischievous smile before looking back down at her magazine. She seemed to find the whole thing very amusing. Henry seemed to notice the change in my expression as well. He stopped what he was doing, walked over to me, and spoke softly. I know. Just follow the rules, and everything will be okay. Trust me." I nodded silently. He turned and went back to his cleaning. Suddenly, Alice's voice rang out again. That's a remarkable plane, isn't it? She was looking out the glass window. I instinctively followed her gaze, and there on the runway, a black and red Cessna sat silently. I whipped my head around and glanced at the photo behind the counter. It was the one. Identical. Then, without thinking, I turned back, and looked at the plane again. That's when I saw it, a figure standing next to the plane. He was standing perfectly still, facing me, facing this brightly lit but deathly silent terminal. Don't look. Henry's voice, suddenly sharp and louder than before, came from behind me. I turned to look at him. He seemed startled by his own outburst, his face a little pale. But I was secretly grateful. If it hadn't been for him, I might have kept staring at that figure for much longer. I quickly looked down, rereading the list of rules, chewing over every word of Rule 5. Do not look at the plane a second time. I cursed myself under my breath, but cursing wouldn't help. All I could do now was rely on this piece of paper to steady myself. At least looking at it wouldn't cause any trouble. I don't know how much time passed. It felt like 10 minutes, maybe longer. I started praying silently in my head, please, let the figure leave. Please, let this be over soon. Just then, Alice stood up and walked toward the counter. I jerked my head up, my eyes instantly meeting hers. I'm going to find some new magazines. Do you want another one of these? Alice reached out, pointing to the National Geographic in my hands. I looked up, forced a smile, and nodded. She walked away, but my gaze couldn't follow her. I looked at the plane again. The figure was now 100 yards away from it, and much closer to the building. He was still looking at me. A chill ran down my spine. I snapped my gaze back to the desk and started to tremble violently, my breathing becoming rapid and ragged. A few minutes later, Alice returned and gently placed a new magazine on the counter. Her hand brushed my shoulder, as if to comfort me. Then, Henry walked up beside me and placed a hand on my back. He'll be gone soon, and so will the plane. As long as you don't look again, everything will be fine, he said, his voice slow and steady. Can I clean over here? I got up and moved aside, walking to the end of the counter and watching Henry mop the floor meticulously. I whispered, thank you. He looked up, nodded, and gave a faint smile. What did you say? Alice asked. I turned my head. Oh, I was just thanking Hen. I stopped before I could finish the name. Alice shot up from her chair, the smile gone from her face. Her nose and the corners of her eyes suddenly began to bleed, a heavy, uncontrolled flow. She started to sob, quietly at first, and then a frantic howl. A scream mixed with pain and fury erupted from her throat. She snatched one of the suitcases and hurled it at me. I dodged in terror as the suitcase slammed into the wall behind me with a deafening crash. Luckily, I reacted quickly. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. I immediately spun around and bolted for the men's restroom, rushing inside and locking the door. Alice pounded furiously on the door a few times, then stopped. So that's how you dance, dear? I can dance, too, she said with a piercing, mocking giggle. Then, with a loud click, she flipped the light switch outside the door, plunging me into darkness. Everything went quiet. A few minutes later, a laugh began. First one voice, then 2, then 3, then 10, then 20. The laughter grew louder, more insane. Some of the voices were mixed with screams. They sounded like they were right outside, pressed against the wooden door. I curled up on the floor, clamping my hands over my ears as tears and cold sweat streamed down my face. Suddenly, another familiar click, the light switch was flipped back on, and a sliver of light shone from under the door. Everything was quiet. It's over. She's gone, and the plane is gone. Henry's voice, as gentle as moonlight. You can come out now. I hesitantly opened the door and walked back to the counter. He had already prepared a fresh cup of coffee for me. I wanted to help more, he said with a slight smile, but you'll find. When Alice gets angry, all you can do is let her burn herself out. I looked up at him, my lips trembling, unable to say a word. Over the next few minutes, Henry cleaned up the blood on the floor and neatly put his tools back in the janitor's closet. He glanced at his watch and sighed. I have to go. Good luck with the rest of your night. I hope I'll see you again. He gave me one last look, his eyes full of sympathy. The kind of look that said, he'd seen many people like me before. I had a faint feeling that he didn't get to decide when he left. After the door closed, I was alone again at the counter. Fear churned in my stomach, and a wave of loneliness washed over me. But the silence didn't last long. A few minutes later, the main doors of the airport were thrown open with a bang, and a team of heavily armed men stormed in. They were dressed in tactical gear, most of their faces obscured by masks and goggles. They swept through every corner of the airport like a whirlwind, weapons raised, searching every nook and cranny, while completely ignoring me. Finally, the 24 or so soldiers gathered in the waiting area. A man in a suit stepped forward. I hadn't even noticed when he'd come in. I'm with the TSA. I need you to answer a few questions. I nodded mechanically. Including yourself, how many people have you seen inside this airport since the security team left? I answered quickly, 2 inside, including me, and 1 outside. The person outside, were they standing next to a black and red airplane? Yes, I answered again. The man in the suit nodded, fell silent for a moment, and then said, "We need to search the jet bridge." I instinctively glanced back at the rule sheet on the counter. I remembered it clearly. Rule 6, under no circumstances, let anyone enter the jet bridge. I turned back, straightened my posture, and adjusted my uniform. No. The man's face changed instantly. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to detain you. I was exhausted, physically and mentally on the verge of collapse. But I kept my eyes fixed on him, not wavering. I will not break the last rule. I decided to give the man in the suit a piece of my mind. Are all you TSA guys this heavily armed now? I asked with cold sarcasm. He completely ignored my jab, his voice even colder. Last chance. Step aside. No. The anger on his face was obvious. He turned his head to the right and lifted his chin. A gunshot rang out. I fell to the floor, feeling the whole world slip away from me. My consciousness began to fade as everything went dark. When I woke up, my fingers were tightly clutching a bottle of water. The coolness in my palm returned before my memory did. Then, I heard John's voice. "Looks like you survived your first night, more or less in one piece." He chuckled softly. "You've met Henry, right? He's a good guy, you'll like him. As for Alice, well, she's a special feature." I opened my eyes and looked at him, my voice as dry as paper. "Am I dead?" John laughed. No, you did great. You were just a little harsh with that not quite dead TSA squad." He shrugged, joking, "Maybe I should add, don't use sarcasm, to the rule sheet. They can't really hurt you, but they can definitely scare you half to death." I still couldn't speak, just slowly picked myself up off the floor, gazing at the morning sun spilling onto the runway. John handed me an envelope. I opened it. A thick stack of crisp, new $100 bills lay neatly inside. "A bonus for you," he said. "You made it through the first night, and it definitely wasn't easy. You'll get used to it." I shot my head up to look at him, the anger finally boiling over. "Are you fucking insane? You think it's normal to just throw someone into a place like this? You think it's okay to make someone face all that without any warning?" I threw the envelope aside and roared, "I quit. You can keep your money. I'm calling the cops. I strode toward the exit, but John blocked my way. Listen, his tone grew much more serious. I know it's not fair. But do you think I wanted this? Do you think anyone would choose this job? This job was never a choice. I just inherited the keys from the person before me. He paused for a moment before continuing. If I had told you the truth beforehand, would you have believed me? Would you have believed that there's a dead man standing on the runway? Or that a chorus of insane laughter would gather outside the restroom? You would have thought I was crazy, or that it was a prank. And the police? They'd just send you to a psych ward. He took a slow breath, his eyes softening a little. The money is still yours, no strings attached. You can leave right now and never come back. No one will blame you, and I won't either. I didn't say anything. My heart was still pounding, but I was starting to calm down. I knew he wasn't lying. I looked down, still unable to meet his eyes. But, if you choose to stay, he said softly, then go to my office, and we'll finish the last of the paperwork. He turned and walked away, toward the front entrance. I stood there, my gaze fixed on the main doors of the airport slowly opening in the first light of dawn, as the first wave of passengers walked into the terminal with smiles on their faces. I just stood there, my mind a complete mess. But I knew one thing for sure, I was never going back to that crowded, noisy, soul-crushing city airport. I turned around and started walking toward John's office.